Good afternoon. This is Jim Shelton from Cleveland, Ohio, and this is
Antwan Wilson.
and
Eric Gordon.
and you guys are
I'm the superintendent here in the Cleveland Metropolitan School District.
and you are
Chancellor, DC Public Schools.
and we're here today to talk about with the National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development, and we want to talk about that and its implications for schools. First of all, what is this social, emotional, and academic development? I'll start with you, Antwan.
Well, I think that what we're basically talking about is the way we help students, one, relate to their environment, learn deeply who they are, and then get in contact with their emotions, and then teach skills to help students succeed both academically, but also social, emotionally, and then also again to relate with others. I think that's a big part of it as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I would say very similarly in Cleveland, we think of 5 core skills. So self-awareness, do I know how I'm feeling and how that impacts how I engage in a community? Self-management, so how do I manage those feelings if I'm upset or if I'm tired or if I'm happy? Awareness of others' feelings, so do I know how Antwan's feeling? Do I know, Jim, how you're feeling? And then how do I manage that relationship? And then finally, problem solving, taking those 4 pieces of knowledge and integrating them to solve the problem in front of me today.
So, Eric, let's stay with that for a second. What does this look like inside a classroom and inside a school?
So we start with our youngest kids and really talk about some of the kind of negative behaviors that you tend to see with kids. So a lot of shouting and a lot of hitting, and we teach Turtle, and Turtle gets into his shell, and calms down, and then Turtle thinks around what his choices are, pokes his head up and looks around and says what his choices are, and then finally puts his arms out and picks a choice and tries it. So it really is a way of helping kids know how to take, if they're frustrated, if they're unhappy, and apply a set of principles to making that into something productive. And it goes from there into middle school, where we use a stoplight kind of strategy, and high school, where we use more of a class meeting where I talk to my peers and work through my problems in that way.
So is this really just like a bad behavior management program, or is it something different than that?
No, it's far from simply a bad behavior management program. It really is about identifying those skills that help us manage how we are feeling and how we're interacting in an environment so that we can be at our very best, so that we can problem solve, we can work well with others, we can take care of ourselves when we need to. So I would say while it does have some behavior management to it, it really is a much more holistic approach to how we bring our very best selves into our classrooms.
Thanks. Antwan, when you want to see this working well across the system, you're just getting really going in D.C., what do you think you're going to see?
Well, I think we're going to see schools where our adults, first and foremost, feel affirmed. They feel like that our teachers in our schools feel like they're not in it by themselves, that they understand that we value and support them, and we've provided them with the tools to help students succeed in the classroom. Students will find that the adults are extremely excited to see them in school, that they are actually teaching strategies to help them cope with the material that they're learning, but also with things that are happening in their environment around them. And I think parents will speak to the fact that the schools are places where their students are successful, that their students like going, and that they notice a change in how their students, or an improvement in how their students relate, one, to other students, but what they feel about themselves, and then how optimistic they are about their future.
And how do you think the focus on social and emotional learning in particular will help to achieve those aims?
Well, I think that when you start with, so first of all, starting with self-management, really trying to help students understand what just the role they play and what happens around them. That's going to be important, because so often what happens with some students when they're not successful, they think about what's happening to them. And as we want students to understand, well, you play a role. Did you do your homework? Did you study? Did you read? Or when you responded, was there some body language maybe that you could control that might lead to some improvement in how people respond to you? I also like to add cultural responsiveness to the frame, and it just gives students an opportunity to understand the role that culture plays in their own identity and development, but also others. I think that what that does is it sets the conditions for learning, because we think about what students need to be able to do in terms of meeting the Common Core State Standards. They have to be able to create, they have to be able to critique each other, and they also have to be able to receive feedback, which means that you really have to have been working on these types of skills in order to be positioned to succeed.
And when you think about what is hard about implementing a system that at scale, where adults and children and their families ultimately are thoughtful about social emotional learning, what do you think the big challenges are? What are the capacities that you need to build in the system?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to do is try to implement this in such a way where people suspend disbelief and they lean into thinking about what's possible. I think that requires identifying some common language that you can use district-wide, thinking about some of the resources, really trying to help people understand the compelling why and the impact that this has on what our core mission is, which is to educate students and prepare them to be successful now and in the future. And so I think that getting the adults on the same page and suspending disbelief is a big part of the work, which is one of the reasons why I think it's important for them to see that the system leader values it so much.
Thanks. One of the things I wonder about this a lot is when young people learn it, we assume things will go better in school. Is there some other payoff for them?
Well, so I would say that there are immediate payoffs in school. We know, for example, in Cleveland that we saw significant decreases in suspension, expulsion, and discipline. We saw increases in student attendance. We know there's a relationship between our social and emotional learning practices and our reading and math scores. And we know this from broader studies nationally as well. But we also know that these are skills that everybody needs, not just as young adults or children, but as adults, that if we're going to work in teams, and we know that's really important more and more so, you have to have these skills. You have to be able to work together. And there's a lot of evidence in the field now suggesting that the social and emotional capacities built in young children persist through far through lifetime, with higher income earned, more job satisfaction, all of the things we actually want for our kids to grow up to when they become adults.
Now, this sounds like something that really a lot of people tend to rely on family and home to take care of when you start thinking about these kinds of things around emotions and things like that. What's the role of school in this? Why do this at school?
Well, I would argue that the last decade or so, we've gotten so narrowly focused on reading and math that we forgot that there's a child in that seat, and that our job is to think about the whole child and the rich experience that school should be for children. And look, my job and Chancellor Wilson's job is to get achievement up. But I need, if I'm going to get better math scores, I need kids who are able to really struggle through the frustration of solving math problems and not just call it quits. And so thinking about what does the whole child bring into the environment, how do they really enjoy the learning environment because they have good relationships with their peers, they have good relationships with their adults, they're actually willing to struggle through and find success on really challenging materials instead of just shutting down. All of those things are things that are absolutely necessary for school. I think it's also important, social emotional learning is not somehow our prescription of a set of values on children. It's not character education. It really is an enduring set of practices that every child and every adult really needs to be successful. And I think that's a really important mark. And I would also say it's not something that we simply need to do for minority children or poor children or urban children. Every one of us needs to have these capacities and really think about it in a universal way across our country.
Thanks. Antwan, let me let you answer the same question. Why do this in schools, and why try and do it systemically?
Well, I think that when we think about the needs of our country, part of it is being able to take on rigorous tasks and challenges regardless of what may come. And a lot of times you don't even know what the big issue is. There's a certain set of skills that helps you get through those types of challenges and prepares you for it. And, the ability to be able to be aware of what's happening around you. Social awareness is extremely important, recognizing that there's actually something you can do to impact what's happening. As Superintendent Gordon just spoke about, or CEO Gordon just spoke about, in terms of the impact on schools, we are putting students in position with new standards where they're being challenged in the classroom, and that's from the earliest of ages. We want students to know what it looks like to be affirmed, to affirm the thinking of another classmate, but also to respectfully disagree, and what that looks like as well. And I think that by assuming that is taught elsewhere in schools, I think we end up sometimes where we are today, and with some of the adults, where we're not listening to other people's viewpoints. We're being stuck by some of the challenges being modeled to us nationally. When we get stuck, instead of being able to understand where the interests are that we all have in terms of moving a particular issue forward, and then being able to problem solve and being able to make some responsible decisions that don't devalue the opinion or interests of other people. This is important to us because we must behave as though we don't have any students to lose.
When you think about the role of the adults, the teachers, and the other folks around children, and what has to happen for them in order for them to be able to execute well on a social and emotional learning agenda, what are the things that come to mind that you need to put in place to support them?
Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the question. I think one of the things we have to do is we have to make things simpler for our teachers while everything around them in terms of the job they're being asked to do is harder than it's ever been, which means that we have to streamline what we're asking to do in the classroom in terms of the ability to access the curriculum, the ability to implement effective teaching strategies, and we have to make it simple. As we roll out our professional development, we need to embed social, emotional, and academic development within the way we provide professional development for teachers. We need to create spaces for teachers to be able to talk about the things that they're bringing into the classroom, some of the challenges that they have, and we have to begin to treat those challenges as system challenges and things that we're there to help them with, as opposed to judgments that we are having about the work that they're doing. And then also we need to support them in terms of identifying the strengths that our students naturally come into school with, and then provide them strategies that they can use to help leverage those strengths to help teach students things that they need to grow in.
Fantastic. Eric, would you like to add anything about how to support teachers in this?
Well, I think you heard it in Chancellor Wilson's remarks, but we really have to think about the social and emotional learning needs of adults as well. So it is actually okay for a teacher to know how he or she is feeling when he or she walks into a classroom, and then thinking about how managing that feeling it makes that person be more successful with the children that they're serving, right? As opposed to assuming that every teacher comes in at the same level of energy, enthusiasm, excitement every single day, despite what might have happened that morning or the evening before. And so I think we have to give teachers and other adults in education the permission to develop their own social, emotional, and academic awareness as well, so that they're performing at their highest capacity as well. And it really fits nicely also in the important conversations around equity and inclusion, and making sure that our kids and our adults get to bring their whole selves to school and be able to know how to bring who I am as a person into the conversation that the three of us are having, or that we would be having with our colleagues out there in Facebook land, and really being able to say, okay, so I get to bring my whole self, I get to be a part of the conversation. We may not agree, but I have tools and skills to know how to have that conversation instead of getting shut down and not bringing a part of me into the conversation. I think that's really important.
Fantastic. Thanks to both of you. Really appreciate it. I think this is a really important topic that the country's going to continue to engage on. Thanks to everybody who tuned in.